The key verse in our Impact Evangelism Seminar is 1 Peter 3:15, which says, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect." What you're about to see is a Christian who is prepared to cope with the kind of questions being raised by a skeptical friend.
I'm having lunch with my friend Mark again today. He's a nice guy, I really like him. But this Christianity thing is really kind of starting to affect his brain, you know what I mean? So this time I've really got some questions for him. I think I'm really going to nail him. First of all, you know, I'm going to ask him, what about all the evil in the world? And if that doesn't work, I'm going to hit him with Jim and Tammy Baker, see what he does with that. I mean, you know, I like Mark. He's a good friend. But, you know, somebody's got to show him that he just can't go putting his belief in any old thing. He's got to critically look at these sorts of things. You know, I want to get him on back on track, you know what I mean?
I'm getting together with my friend Lee again today. After the challenge he gave me last time and his 4 million questions, let me tell you, I've done my homework. But I've been praying for him, and I'm looking forward to this opportunity because I think he's starting to open up just a little bit, though he's still rebelling too. It'll be interesting to see what happens today. So what do you think, Lee? Should we have a little bit of dessert?
I don't know. I'm trying to lose some weight. I think maybe I'll skip it this time.
Yeah, but this looks awfully tempting here. Death by chocolate?
I've died a few times from that before. I think I'm going to pass.
Well, if you're passing, I'm going to pass too.
You know, I was telling you about this Huey Lewis concert.
Yeah.
It was so great. Right near the end, they really cranked up these lights, you know, and they were spinning, and they had these laser things going, you know, and they came out for about 4 encores, and it was really hot. Every time they do it, everybody was getting really excited. It was great. I'd never been to one before.
Huey plays some great stuff.
Yeah, he really does. I like his stuff.
You want to hear something really funny?
What's that?
You know his song, Hip to Be Square?
Yeah.
Remember that one a couple years ago?
Sure.
I heard that song in church before I ever heard it on the radio.
What, was it a college group or something?
No, this was a Sunday morning service.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Well, what were they playing it there for?
Well, it wasn't just a rock out or anything, but it was a song that fit the theme of what was being discussed in the church that day, and so they used it.
Doesn't sound like any church I've been used to.
Well, at our church, we really bend over backwards to try to make the message relevant to people, you know, in our generation, you know, normal people. By the way, Lee, you're, you know, semi-normal. When are you going to come to the church with me?
Come to church with you?
Yeah,
I don't think so. Well, you know, it's that whole Christianity thing, it just seems like there's so many holes in it. You know what I mean? I mean, philosophically. And yeah, I'm not ready to kind of take a leap of faith into the
flying leap.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't think that's for me.
You know, I think I understand why you're saying that, because a lot of Christians present their beliefs as some sort of mystical, non-describable feeling.
Yeah.
They don't really give you reasons for what they believe.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, some people get the idea that faith is like the Sunday school kid thought when the teacher asked, "What is faith?" He said, "It's believing something even though you know it's not true."
Well, isn't that what it is?
No.
That's what I think it is.
No. Faith isn't believing something you know isn't true, but it's taking action and, you know, moving on something that, you know, corresponds to the facts that you've checked out. The facts point a certain direction, but you finally have to make a commitment or take a step in that same direction. You know, it's like you drinking that coffee. You don't have absolute facts or evidence that that coffee isn't poisoned.
No, but I know this restaurant's a pretty reliable place. I've been here before.
Sure.
I trust them,
Sure.
I guess.
See, that's it, though. You have the facts from being here before and knowing other people who've eaten here and walked out okay, you know. But just like you said, you trust them because you don't, just because 100 people before haven't been poisoned doesn't mean you wouldn't have been today. You took a step of faith based on evidence that you thought was, you know, sufficient. And I don't know if you've thought about this before, Lee, but your lack of belief in God, your atheism, is a step of faith going, you know, a step further than what you think are facts against the existence of God.
I never thought about that. But it seems to me when you talk about God, when you talk about the existence of God, how in the world could there be a good God if there's so much evil around the world? You know what I mean? All these terrible things that happen. It seems like if there was a good God, he would just destroy all the evil. Wouldn't that make sense to you?
It makes sense to me. Are you ready to be destroyed?
No.
You know, a lot of people say if there was a good God, he'd just wipe out all the evil.
Yeah.
But it's easy to forget that, you know, if he wiped out all the evil tonight at midnight, I don't think any of us would be left.
Hmm.
You know, it's easy to blame God. We forget that the reason he doesn't wipe out evil like that is because he's patient with us. And another thing is, you know, it's like reading a novel.
Mm-hmm.
If you read a novel and you get through and stop 2 chapters before the end and put it down, you know, you're not justified to criticize the author. You know, you lay down the book and say, author didn't finish the plot. He should have, you know, resolved this thing. He should have taken care of it. And yet, you know, a lot of people blame God for not getting rid of all the evil, and they don't realize that he promises he will do that. He just hasn't finished the story yet. The novel isn't complete. He promises to get rid of all the evil. But I've got a question for you, Lee. You're talking about evil as if it's some kind of a real thing, but if there's no God in the universe, how can you even say there is such a thing as evil?
Well, why not? You just tell things are bad, so they must be evil, right? I mean, what's the connection?
Yeah, if there's no God, though, there's no absolute standard of right and wrong. It's just preferences. You know, if there's no God, it's just all what I think versus what you think. I may think it's okay to beat up little old ladies or rape and that kind of thing. I may think it's okay, and you may say, well, it doesn't fit my tastes. But see, in an atheistic universe without a God, there's no basis for morality at all. Doesn't make any difference.
Okay, well, let's look at it a little differently.
All right.
Why couldn't God have just created a world where there wasn't any evil in the first place? Why couldn't he just created a perfect world or a good world and just, you know, so he didn't have to come and destroy evil later on?
Well, what you're describing is what the Bible says that God did, that he created us without evil. God didn't make evil. He didn't want evil. But he also wanted us to be free. And so he created us good, but free to choose whether to respond back to his love or not. See, real love requires freedom. You can't love something if you're not free to not love. See what I mean?
You have to have a choice.
Yeah, real love always entails a choice. God created us good, but in love, in wanting us to love him back, he had to give us a choice to not love him back. And unfortunately, we took the latter choice. We chose not to love him, and we rebelled against God and turned away from him. But the good news, you know, that is, you know, has to be added to those facts is that he not only created us that way, not only did we turn away from him, but he also is ready to forgive us and lead our lives.
Forgive us, huh?
Yeah.
Sort of like he forgave Jim and Tammy, I bet.
Jim and Tammy,
Yeah.
I wondered when you'd bring up Jim and Tammy.
Well, how could you not? I mean,
Well, what about Jim and Tammy? Do you have a problem with Jim and Tammy, other than the mascara, which I can understand? Do you have a problem with them?
well, yeah, I mean, you know, they're accused of all sorts of things with financially. You look at the allegations of financial mismanagement. You look at the things that supposedly happened involving morality thing. Yeah, it's wrong. It's hypocritical.
See, but you're coming back. I agree with you, by the way. But you're coming back again to some kind of standard. And what you don't realize that you're doing is that you're agreeing with Christian standards and agreeing with what Jesus taught. That those things, hypocrisy and misuse of finances and dishonesty and immorality, those are things Jesus said were wrong. And I agree with you, those are wrong. And unfortunately, all of us have, you know, gone wrong in some of those areas. And that's again why it's exciting that he's willing to love and forgive us.
So you're saying there has to be a standard,
Yeah,
and God's the standard.
right.
Well, doesn't it seem to you more likely, okay, let's talk about likelihoods.
All right.
Isn't it more likely that this whole idea of God is more people sort of projecting this father image in the sky? You know what I mean? They have
Kind
some
of wish fulfillment.
wish fulfillment. They have some psychological need for some warm and fuzzy being, sort of like a celestial elf or something. You know what I mean? Somebody who they can kind of pat him on the head and they can feel good about. I mean, isn't it more likely that it's sort of projecting our wishes on the
that's
sky?
an interesting argument. There was a guy named Feuerbach which first formulated that argument.
Bob Feuerbach in the accounting department.
No, not Bob.
No, another one.
Different Feuerbach, a philosopher. But he said that, you know, kind of what you just said, that, you know, our earthly fathers fail us. And so we turn and look for another father, and we sort of project a father image into the sky.
I mean, that makes sense
because we wish he was there.
Right.
Well, actually, I think you got it turned around, and in reality, we all had earthly fathers who were authorities in our lives, and we all wanted to rebel against them because of our sinful nature. And then, when we realize not only is there an earthly father who is an authority to rebel against, but there's also a heavenly father who does exist, we also wanted to rebel against him, and in our rebellion, we sort of projected that there is no God, sort of a wish fulfillment. See, now really, neither argument proves its point. They're both sort of, you know, psychological guesses.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the same argument can cut both ways, and in reality, I really think atheism is a crutch. I think it's a psychological projection. I think it's a kind of a wish masking over God in the hopes that there is no God that I'll be accountable to someday.
Well, okay, you're giving me some arguments, you know, countering my arguments against God, but that doesn't mean there's positive proof. You know what I mean? What kind of positive evidence is there that would show or indicate that a God would exist?
Oh, man, you got an hour or two?
Not really, but hit me with your best stuff.
Well, I'll try to summarize. There's probably three main areas of, you know, evidence for God. One is more philosophical, but it starts with, for instance, the whole idea or reality of the fact that this universe has order and design in it. And I don't think there's any way to substantiate that or account for that except for knowing that there's a divine order, someone who's put all the order into the universe as we see it. You know, this stuff doesn't happen by accident. You have a watch on?
Yeah.
Okay, look at that watch. I mean, that watch, if you found that...
$39.95.
That's a nice watch.
Thank you.
If you found that laying somewhere, you wouldn't pick it up and go, oh, praise the cosmos. Look how this thing has fallen together, and just, you know, all these molecules and all this metal and all these, you know, springs or batteries or whatever is in there has just formulated over a long period of time and come together to make this timepiece.
Well, it's clear that something like this, somebody had to make something like, because of the complexity.
Right, but now look down from the watch, look at your hand. Did you know that your hand is much more complex, has much more detail and design than that watch does? And yet, you want to look at the watch and say, of course it has a designer. And yet you look at your hand and think, oh, it's chance, it just evolved, it just happened. So, I mean, that's one example. There's design built into the universe from the, you know, macrocosm, the stars in the universe, right down to our bodies and right down into the microscope, the microcosm. Shows evidence that there's a divine orderer. Another fact is that, you know, science is built on the whole idea of cause and effect, and they study effects to figure out what the causes are. Well, if you really think about it long enough, you realize that each effect has to have been caused.
Sure.
And, you know, it's like a bunch of dominoes falling over. There has to be something that started the first domino. There has to be, you know, the universe doesn't explain itself. It's just a whole conglomerate of effects that have to have a cause. It's the way I like...
You're saying God's...
I'm saying that God
He kicked over the first domino.
He kicked it over, right. He is the first cause. And one way to describe it is, if I had a little ball on the table here, like a racquetball or something, and I tried to convince you that just was there by itself. Would you believe that? I mean, that nothing caused it, it's just self-caused?
No, it would have had to have been created.
What if I made that ball the size of this whole room?
Let's say somebody created it.
Someone had to still make it. What if I make it the size of the whole world?
Probably evolved by chance.
Yeah, right. See, when we make the ball big enough, the size of the world or even the size of the whole universe, we try to get out of what is obvious because we realize the implications, that there's a God who created the whole thing. So, you know, not only is there order that has to have a divine order, not only are there effects that had to have a cause that started it all, but then there's morality built into the fabric of the universe, too. We know implicitly, you know, innately that there's right and wrong, just like you know, saying that, you know, we just know there's right and wrong. You know Jim and Tammy did something wrong. See, that only makes sense as if there's some sort of a divine moral lawgiver who has designed us that way, to know innately that there's right and wrong. Now, those are more philosophical.
But don't you have, wouldn't I have a sense in me, like when I feel guilt, doesn't that just mean I have my own standard and I've violated that standard or something?
Well, you have your own standard, but your standard is above you, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you sometimes fail to reach it, and that's why you feel guilty.
Why would you come up with your own standard and put it above you? And why is it that everyone has a standard that they fall short of? See, it's because there's a God whose standard is infinitely higher and who has built into us a knowledge of right and wrong. I think that's what that answer best accounts for it. And the Bible and Christians believe that there's a God who built the universe that way. But those are the more philosophical kinds of things, Lee. There are also historical evidences where God broke into history, where he spoke through prophets and explained things that were going to happen in the future, prophecies. In some cases, 800 years ahead of time.
Things that actually did happen.
That happened in detail. You can look in your own, you have a Bible at home, don't you?
I think I do.
I think I saw one on your coffee
okay,
table.
right.
Dust the thing off and open it up right about to the middle to Isaiah 53.
You have to help me find it,
Well, Isaiah 53, I'll help you find it. But you read that, it's a detailed description of the crucifixion of Christ as well as his resurrection, 800 years before it happened, in detail. So we have things like that with prophecy where God broke into history, but especially where God broke into history through the person of Christ, who gave evidence that he was actually God, the Creator, who was living as a man and walking around among us, performing miracles, knowing things that a normal man couldn't know, teaching us things that were too above us to be from just a man, and then proving it all by dying and resurrecting the third day. And by the way, Lee, there's more evidence for the resurrection than any other ancient, thing in history, any other ancient event.
Other books on that?
I can show you lots of books and evidence. And by the way, a lot of people have been persuaded by those kinds of evidence. People who set out to disprove Christianity. They said, I'm gonna unravel this whole thing.
Yeah.
And they start looking at the evidence and they're going, man, this thing has facts backing it up. And they end up committing their lives to Christ and following him. But the last piece of evidence I want to give you to answer your question a few minutes ago, what is the positive evidence? Not only do we have philosophical evidence and historical evidence, but I have personal evidence. Lee, Christ has really changed my life.
Well, you were a scuzzball, I gotta tell you.
That may be, but I had to be one just to hang around with you guys.
Well, listen, I think that's great for you. I really think that's good that you found something that you feel comfortable with and satisfies you, and I think that's great. You got your truth and I got my truth. It seems to me that, the important thing is that you're sincere about what you believe.
Sincerity is all important.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you sincerely believe in it, it's fine for you.
Lee, remember the space shuttle accident a few years ago?
Where it blew up, yeah, sure.
Do you think that the people getting on that space shuttle sincerely believed that the thing would fly safely and then come back from its mission and that they'd come back unharmed?
Sure, they wouldn't have gone up if they didn't sincerely believe that, I suppose.
Lee, they were sincere, but they were sincerely wrong. See, sincerity doesn't change the facts. You sincerely believe the coffee isn't poisoned. It really could have been. You could have died. Sincerity doesn't make any difference in what is reality. It doesn't change the facts. And the fact that you sincerely, don't believe in God doesn't change the fact that he really exists and that you're accountable to him.
But, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that way. But you still got the problem with Christians being so narrow-minded. You know what I mean? In other words, they're saying, our way's the only way. And it seems to me that the opposite would be true. Because if there were a God, you would think that, all roads would lead to him.
All the religions.
All the religions, Buddhists and Muslims and all these different religions, they all would lead to the same God. I mean, doesn't that make sense? Isn't that logical?
Maybe from our perspective it seems that way. But, when you say it's narrow-minded, do you think, Lee, that 747 pilots are narrow-minded?
What do you mean?
Well, think of it this way. 747 pilots are so, limited in their perspective. They always insist on landing their jets on that little narrow strip. Why don't they
better?
Exactly. Why don't they get creative, though? Why don't they land on the ocean once in a while? Why don't they land on mountaintops? They're narrow-minded. They say there's this one narrow strip that leads to life. I got to land there, we all die.
Yeah.
Well, the reason they have to do that, it's obvious, because that's the only way they're going to live.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that Jesus taught, that there's one narrow strip, one narrow path that leads to life. Not that there were other legitimate ways. The ocean isn't legitimate, nor is the mountaintop for a 747. Jesus wasn't trying to say there are lots of ways to God, but I'm saying mine's the only one that I want you to follow. He was saying there are no other ways, and if it wasn't for me, there would be no way. He's saying this is the one way to God. And by the way, about God...
They all believe, all the religions believe in God, though. I mean, isn't that a
well, they
common
may call
thread?
him God, but if all the religions are true, then God's schizophrenic.
Why?
Because he's saying one thing to one religion and something contradictory and opposite to another religion. For instance, did you know that Buddhism in its purest form is atheistic?
They don't believe in a God?
The Buddha himself did not even believe in God.
Huh.
Now, some Buddhists today do, and some of them have many gods. Hindus believe that everything is God. The plants are God, the picture's God, the copy is God, we're God. Everything, you know, New Age movement
That's got some
says
appeal to it.
Well, but it contradicts what the Buddhists say. Now,
So
then,
they can't all be true, is what you're saying.
Christianity says there is one God, and he's separate from all of this. He made it, but he's not part of it. Now, see, if one God inspired all those religions, he's schizophrenic. He's changing his mind. He doesn't know what he even thinks of himself. It doesn't make sense. They can't all be true. But, you know, the argument really isn't with me, Lee. It's not my opinion that's important. Really, you're arguing with Jesus. Because Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. It was in John chapter 14. He said, no one comes to the Father but through me.
But there you go. You're quoting the Bible.
So what's wrong with quoting the Bible?
How can you believe the Bible is full of contradictions?
Of course, Lee. Everyone knows the Bible's full of contradictions. I'm just curious. What are your top three?
Top three contradictions?
Yeah. What are the three that bother you the most?
Well, I don't know specifically, but you hear all the time, you know, there's contradictions. You know, there's things that don't jive exactly.
You hear it. Yeah. But I'm asking you, what's the evidence? You know, show me some that bother you. I find out most of the time when I ask people that, they don't have anything in mind at all. Now, you know, there are some things that we have to look at. There are different perspectives on the same story that don't all give all the facts. But a lot of things that people think are contradictions are really just different perspectives on the same truth.
So they could be reconciled.
Yeah, they're just different angles of the same, you know, event.
So if I went and found some contradictions, if I read some books and you could show me how they would be consistent.
I'm not saying I have it all at my fingertips, but I think I could answer some of them, and others, you know, there are books written, whole books written, answering these alleged contradictions. The Bible doesn't contradict, Lee. It's consistent because God is the one who inspired the Bible.
Well, okay, let's do this. Let's take it from a different angle.
All right.
Let's assume for a minute the Bible's true.
Let's assume it for the rest of our lives.
No, just for a minute.
All right.
We'll just go ahead. Just a second. Everybody seems to interpret it differently. You know what I mean? It seems like anybody can take the words in the Bible and make them mean what they want to mean.
Words don't have any meaning in themselves?
Yeah, I mean, they can just read into it whatever they want.
You just make it say what you want it to.
Right. I mean, isn't that true?
Lee, that's great.
What's great?
I can't believe it. You're convinced?
No,
You're convinced that what I'm saying is true and you want to become a Christian right now?
I didn't say that.
Well, maybe not exactly, but that's the way I'm interpreting your words.
I didn't say anything like that.
Well, I took your words to mean that you agree with everything I've been saying.
Well, you can't just take words that obviously mean something and then twist them and interpret them.
So you had a specific meaning you wanted me to understand.
Sure. I mean, how else could we talk?
Well, if you expect me to respect your meaning and to try to understand it and interpret it, why don't you do the same thing with the Bible?
Are you saying there is a meaning there? And
surely, that's the whole basis of communication. The fact that the writer, the communicator, has a meaning and he puts it down, and it's our job as receivers of that meaning to interpret it, to understand it. Now, sometimes that's difficult, and that's why we have to study hard. That's why at our church we take Bible study seriously, and we, you know, study books about it, and we read commentaries. It's a serious issue that takes a lot of work in some cases. But it's there, the meaning's there. And when Jesus says things like, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me, how else do you interpret it than to say Jesus is the way to God? There's a meaning there. And it's our job to take it seriously.
And to find out what the meaning is.
Yeah, most people don't have so much a problem with understanding what the meaning is as much as avoiding the obvious meaning that's there.
Well, what about the pygmies in South America? What about them?
Lee, I didn't know you had a special interest in pygmies.
Well, I don't, but, you know, it's...
Well, by the way, you said South America. I thought they were from Africa.
Wherever.
know, wherever they're from.
Wherever they're from, how's God going to judge them? What about that?
You know, Lee, there's an old saying. It goes like this. It says, if you really don't want to believe something, one excuse is as good as another.
What's that supposed to mean?
I'll come back to what that means. Let me first respond to the pygmy question or the aborigine or whoever else you want to point to.
You know, a lot of people in Cleveland would be another example.
Okay, people in Cleveland. A lot of people are concerned, you know, is God fair? Will he, you know, how is he going to judge them? Well, we know for sure that God is fair. And that Jesus promised anyone, anywhere in the world, it doesn't matter where, that seeks him, that wants to know truth, that doesn't take easy answers, but really looks for God, will find him. You know, if they want to know him, they'll find him. In fact, it says in the Bible that there's enough evidence, even in nature, to know that there's a God. And if people will look for him, Jesus promised that they would find. And there are amazing stories, Lee, about, for instance, Hindus who were brought up in India being raised by gurus and taught by gurus who realize that there aren't answers in Hinduism. They keep asking questions and seeking truth, and they end up finding Christ. And there are similar examples with Islam and with other religions. People in Cleveland, I'm sure I could find examples there as well. People that seek God find him. But the reason I said what I said about, you know, one excuse is as good as another is because, Lee, I get the sense that you're not really looking for answers or for truth so much as the fact that you're trying to find ways of avoiding the answers that are there. You know, ways of escaping the obvious truth of Christianity. And so when I get that sense that someone's kind of putting out questions kind of to keep God at arm's length, I wonder, you know, is there some underlying current here? Is there some reason that they really don't want to acknowledge the truthfulness of Christianity? You know, is there something, Lee, in your life you're afraid you'll have to give up? That you're afraid something, you know, something that God will change if you decide to follow Christ?
I don't know. I'm living with my girlfriend, but, you know, we don't hurt anybody.
See, now I appreciate your honesty on that. I think you realize, even though that's popular, everyone does that, no big deal, I think you realize that the Bible makes it clear that, you know, sex outside of marriage is a sin, and that if we're really going to follow Christ, that's not part of our lives. And if you realize that, and if you're saying, I don't care what God says, I don't want to change that area, then you're going to keep having these intellectual, you know, excuses that kind of put a fog out there and keep you from acknowledging the truthfulness of Christianity. And until you're willing to change that area, you're not going to be able to see it.
But isn't enough just to be a good person? And basically, we're good people.
Theoretically, if we could be good, you know, that would be enough. But the problem is, Lee, there's only one person in history who's been perfectly good. And I hate to tell you, but it ain't you.
Close? Was I even
You
close?
weren't close. The fact is, Jesus is the only person to live a perfect life. All of us fall short, far short. Remember what we were saying earlier, that we all have a standard that's right here?
Yeah.
And then we all fall short of that standard?
Yeah.
Well, Lee, our standards, your standard, tends to be pretty scuzzy at times. It's not that high of a standard, right? You're not that tough on yourself.
Yeah.
Well, God's standard is infinitely higher than yours. And you and I and all of us fall far short of that standard. And we all deserve God's punishment, his wrath, the death penalty. We all deserve death because of our rebellion against God. None of us are good enough.
That's real upbeat stuff, Mark.
I'm sorry, that's the predicament we're in. And that's the bad news that people need to understand before the gospel becomes good news. The word gospel means good news, and it is good news when you realize that you're in a predicament because you're a sinner and you're standing in front of a holy God. But the good news of the gospel is that Jesus Christ not only lived that perfect life, but then he died on the cross. As you know, I know you know that, but the reason he did that was to pay the penalty, the death penalty that I deserve and that you deserve. And so that's what the Bible's all about, that God loves us, but he also sees that we're rebels and that we deserve a penalty. But then he came down as one of us, as Christ, and paid that penalty for us, so that no longer do we have to be separated from him, or do we have to pay the penalty ourselves. But, Lee, it's not enough just to understand that. You know, it's not enough.
What do you do?
It's not enough just to know the facts, but you have to personally respond to it. It's like being a bachelor and realizing that the girl that you have been going out with is the perfect girl. She'll make the perfect wife. It's not enough just to know that. It's not enough to read books about marriage and to go to weddings and hang around with married people and to think about marriage a lot. You finally have to say, not only does she potentially look like the perfect wife, but I'm going to actualize that by marrying her. And see, a lot of people in churches know all about Jesus and all about his death on the cross and that it was for them and all that, but they haven't personally appropriated it. And Lee, that's what you need to do, just as I already have done, is appropriate that good news that Jesus paid the penalty for you. You need to personally ask him for his forgiveness and ask him to take control of your life.
Well, I appreciate you explaining that. I'm not ready to do that. I still have questions, and I know you understand that.
That's okay, Lee. I mean, we can keep talking about your questions.
Yeah, I do appreciate the fact that you've thought this through more than I thought you had, and I appreciate you trying to answer some. We better get back to work, though. We're going to be late. Feuerbach's going to be on our case unless we get back there.
Well, let's get back. But, Lee, I just want to challenge you and encourage you to not put this on the back burner so far it falls off the stove. I mean, these are important. In fact, these are the most important issues that you can think about. And so I encourage you to do whatever you have to do to get your questions answered. But remember that the goal is to find out who your Creator is and find out about his love for you. And finally, to receive his forgiveness so that you can experience the changed life that I've found and that you need.
Well, we'll keep talking about it. I appreciate that. And,
All right.
the thing that kind of